My son told his girlfriend's parents I was the building's caretaker. So I calmly sold the property he'd been living in rent-free for 4 years and used every dollar to bring my real family to Canada. Let me tell you about Daniel Kowalski, my son, 34 years old, corporate lawyer at Pemberton and Associates in downtown Vancouver, pulling in $320,000 a year. He drives a leased Audi Q7, wears suits from Holt Renfrew that cost more than my first month's rent when I arrived in this country with $40 and a single suitcase. He lives in the upper unit of a triplex I own in Kitsilano, 3 blocks from the beach, a unit that rents for $4,200 a month on the open market. He has paid me exactly nothing in 4 years. I am Viktor Kowalski. I am 67 years old. I came to Vancouver from Krakow, Poland in 1981 with my wife Marta. God rest her soul. And I built something from nothing on a street in East Vancouver where nobody wanted to open a business. Kowalski's Deli. 41 years of pierogies, beet soup, smoked kielbasa, fresh rye bread baked every morning at 4 a.m. I employed 23 people at our peak. I won a City of Vancouver Small Business Award in 2009. I fed the neighborhood through 3 recessions and a pandemic. And when I sold it in 2020 for $940,000, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. I was wrong. The hardest part was watching my son decide he was too good for the man who made him possible. It didn't happen overnight. I want to be fair about that. My son wasn't always the person he became. When Daniel was 12, he used to sit on the counter of the deli on Saturday mornings and fold the paper bags while I sliced meat. He'd practice his Polish with the older ladies who came in for their weekly bread. He was proud then. Proud of our name on the window. Proud of the regulars who knew him since he was in a stroller. That boy was still there somewhere, buried under $300 haircuts and Bay Street ambitions, but I hadn't seen him in a long time. The first sign was subtle. He started going by Dan Koval in professional settings. Not legally, his passport still says Daniel Stanisław Kowalski, but on his business cards, on his firm's website, in introductions at the dinner parties Vanessa hosted in my building. Kowalski is just a bit much for clients to process, Dad. I didn't argue. Names get shortened. I understood that. Then came the kitchen incident. I had given Daniel the upper unit after Marta passed in 2019, thinking he needed somewhere stable while he was building his career, and I would take the main floor. 2 other units were rented to tenants, a young couple on the top floor and a retired nurse named Mrs. Abramowitz on the garden level. It was a good arrangement. I cooked Sunday dinners in my kitchen, and Daniel would come down, eat, watch hockey with me, and sometimes we'd talk about nothing in particular. Those evenings were the best part of my week. But after Vanessa moved in upstairs, the Sunday dinners became less frequent. Then they stopped entirely. She found my kitchen uncomfortable, Daniel explained. The smells from the deli spices I kept in the cupboards. The old Polish calendar my sister had sent me from Krakow, still hanging on the wall. The framed photograph of my parents standing outside their apartment building in 1965. She was redecorating the upper unit, he said, going for a cleaner aesthetic, and it made her think about the rest of the building differently. I replaced the calendar. I moved the photograph to my bedroom. I bought new dish towels at West Elm because Daniel said the old ones looked shabby. I am ashamed of myself now for doing those things. The dinner parties Vanessa hosted were something to witness. She had 212,000 followers on Instagram at the time. A lifestyle account she ran under the name Van in Kits, all filtered photographs of ocean views and overpriced salads and our building's restored heritage exterior. She called it her space, our beautiful home. I once counted 17 posts featuring my building without a single mention that someone else owned it. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself Daniel was young, that he'd find his footing, that the pressure of building a legal career in Vancouver was real, and I should give him room. I kept cooking. I kept the furnace running. I kept paying the property taxes $12,400 a year, and the building insurance and the maintenance costs. I fixed the leaking gutter on the east side myself in November rain because I didn't want to bother Daniel with it. The breaking point when I look back honestly, had been building for months. But the moment that changed, everything happened on a Wednesday evening in February. Vanessa's parents were visiting from Victoria, Gordon and Patricia Hartley, old BC money. The kind that goes back to the CPR era. Gordon had been a partner at a large accounting firm and now sat on 3 nonprofit boards. Patricia organized charity galas. They were perfectly pleasant people in that particular way. That very comfortable people can be pleasant, genuinely warm, as long as nothing disrupted the version of the world they understood. Daniel had asked me that morning if I could be unobtrusive during their visit. Those were his exact words. Unobtrusive. I said, of course. I would stay on my floor. No problem. Then around 7 that evening I needed to check the utility room in the basement because Mrs. Abramowitz had mentioned the hot water pressure seemed low. I went through the laundry corridor and came up the back stairs, not intending to pass through anyone's space at all. But the basement utility door is right beside the main hallway. And as I came up, I heard voices in the front entrance. And then I heard Daniel's voice clearly introducing me to his girlfriend's parents. And Dad is our building manager, he said. He handles the maintenance for the property. I stood in the corridor for a moment. Building manager. Not my father. Not the man who owns this triplex. Not the person who made it possible for Daniel to live in this city at all. Building manager. I went back downstairs and stood in the utility room for a while, looking at the boiler. Then I adjusted the pressure valve on the water system, wrote a note to Mrs. Abramowitz that the issue was resolved, and went to bed. I lay awake for 2 hours. I thought about my father, who worked in a steel factory for 30 years and never once apologized for his hands. I thought about Marta, who used to say that a tree ashamed of its own roots will fall in the first wind. I thought about Daniel at 12 years old, folding paper bags and chatting with the Saturday regulars. Then I thought about him saying building manager to 2 strangers, and I felt something settle inside me. Quiet and certain. I didn't do anything that week. Or the next. I am not a man who acts from anger. I waited, and I watched, and I made sure I was seeing clearly. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, Daniel and Vanessa had her parents over for brunch in the upper unit. I had spent the previous afternoon making my mother's Barsha proper beet soup, 6 hours of work, fresh beet reduction, a clear ruby broth my mother taught me from her own mother's recipe. I made enough for 8 people. I thought perhaps Daniel might bring some upstairs, share something real with these people who were going to be his family. Maybe even introduce me properly over a bowl of soup. Instead, I heard them order from a brunch restaurant on West 4th. $60 avocado toasts and $22 orange juices. The soup sat on my stove. I packed it into containers that evening. On Tuesday, I found the containers untouched in the recycling bin in the backyard. He hadn't even put them in the fridge. I sat with my morning coffee for a long time after I found those containers. I thought about 41 years of 4 a.m. mornings. I thought about the winter I worked Christmas Day and New Year's Day 3 years in a row so I could save enough for Daniel's first year of university. I thought about the tuition checks I wrote to UBC for 4 years, and then the ones I wrote to Allard School of Law for 3 more. I thought about the down payment I gave him for his first car because he needed reliable transportation for his articling. And I thought about the word unobtrusive and the words building manager, and I made a decision. There were 3 things I needed to do. I didn't tell anyone. The first call I made was to an immigration lawyer named Helen Park, whose office was on Hastings Street. I had researched her firm for a week beforehand. She came from a Korean immigrant family, had built her practice on family reunification cases, and her client reviews described someone who understood what it meant to sponsor people across an ocean. I explained what I had in mind. I wanted to sponsor 3 family members from Poland. My nephew Alexander, 26, a trained chef working at a hotel restaurant in Krakow for wages that barely covered rent. My niece Zofia, 23, a nursing student who had finished her degree but couldn't find stable placement in the Polish hospital system. And my younger cousin's son, Tomasz, 28, an engineer working contract jobs because the permanent positions kept going to people with connections he didn't have. Mr. Kowalski, This is a significant financial commitment, Helen Park said. Sponsorship obligations, settlement funds, housing support. We're looking at roughly $200,000 in total costs over the first 2 years. I understand, I said. I have the funds. The second call was to my real estate agent, a woman named Sandra Chen, who had sold me 2 rental properties back in 2004 and knew the Vancouver West Side market the way I knew my delicates. She had been sending me market updates for years out of professional habit. Sandra, I said, I need to know what my Kitsilano triplex is worth in the current market. Victor, she said without missing a beat, you're sitting on at least 2.6, possibly 2.8 if we price it right. It's a restored heritage property. 3 units. Kit's location. Walking distance to everything. I could have buyers lined up within 2 weeks. What about a quiet sale? No public listing. Just your network? She paused. That might actually get you a cleaner price. Serious buyers, no tire kickers. You want to move on this? I want to understand my options first. The third call was to my bank. I opened a new account, separate from the joint administrative account Daniel had signing authority on for building expenses, something I had added him 2 years ago when I thought he might eventually help manage the property. I transferred my operating funds and investments into the new account. Then I called the bank's estates and trusts division and updated my beneficiary designations entirely. By that evening, I had set 3 things in motion. I poured myself a glass of Żubrówka, the Polish bison grass vodka I kept in the freezer, and I sat at my kitchen table, the way my father used to sit at his, with both hands flat on the surface, very still. I felt better than I had in years. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. I was not motivated by rage. If anything, I was sad. Sad in that particular way that comes when you have waited too long hoping someone would become who you needed them to be. I had tried more than once to talk to Daniel directly. The previous spring, I had said quietly that it hurt me when he introduced me to his colleagues as the property manager. He had looked at me with genuine confusion, as though I had complained about something absurd, and said, "Dad, it's just easier for people to understand. What's the big deal?" That was the last time I raised it. After that, I understood that Daniel wasn't going to change through conversation. He had decided what he was, and who I was, and no amount of talking from me was going to shift that. The only language left was consequence. Over the next 3 weeks, I signed the paperwork with Helen Park and transferred the first installment of legal and government fees. I gave Sandra the green light to quietly approach buyers. She had 3 serious inquiries within 8 days. A young couple who had just sold their tech startup and wanted something with character. A professor from UBC with family money looking for a long-term investment. A retired physician from Burnaby, upgrading to the West Side. All cash buyers. All motivated. On a Sunday afternoon when Daniel and Vanessa were at the farmer's market, they went every week, spending $40 on artisanal cheese and photographing everything for Instagram. Sandra brought the buyers through. I showed them the building myself. The doctor from Burnaby made an offer that evening. $2.7 million. Cash. 30-day close. No conditions. I accepted the next morning. The closing date was May 15th. Daniel did not know. In the meantime, I had found myself an apartment. A 1-bedroom on East 12th in Mount Pleasant. 1,200 square feet with a south-facing kitchen where I could grow herbs on the windowsill. $1,200 less per month than I had been paying in property taxes alone on the Kits building. I gave my notice to the building in early April, citing a family transition, and arranged for Mrs. Abramowitz to receive first right of refusal on her new tenancy arrangements with the incoming owner, who agreed to honor existing leases. I told nobody except Helen Park and Sandra. Alexander called from Krakow on a Thursday evening in April. "Uncle Victor." The paperwork came. "Are you serious? You're really doing this?" "Dead serious," I said. "By August, if the processing holds." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear the street noise of a Polish city through the phone, cars and trams and voices. "Uncle Victor, I have been washing dishes on the side to save money since I was 19. I don't know how to thank you." Come and cook, I said. That's all. Come and cook and remember who you are. Zofia cried. Actual tears, the kind you hear even through a phone. She said she had been applying for nursing positions in Warsaw and getting nowhere. That the healthcare system was moving people based on who you knew, not what you could do. She said she had been starting to give up on the idea that hard work meant anything. I told her that hard work meant everything. But sometimes you needed to be somewhere that let you prove it. Tomasz sent me a voice message in Polish that was 6 minutes long. I played it 3 times. He had a precise, formal way of speaking that reminded me of my own father. He said he understood this was a financial burden, and he would repay every cent. I wrote back and told him family doesn't keep accounts. He wrote back and said that was the most Canadian thing he had ever heard, and I laughed for the first time in weeks. May 15th came and went quietly. The sale closed. $2.7 million moved into my new account. The doctor from Burnaby and his wife were kind enough to send flowers with a note thanking me for the beautiful condition of the property. Daniel was in Ottawa that week for depositions on a corporate case. I packed the last of my things from the main floor and moved to Mount Pleasant on a Friday. I left the unit clean, the appliances wiped down, the walls freshly touched up. On the following Monday, a registered letter arrived at Daniel's office from Pemberton and Associates building management contact, a formality Sandra had arranged with the new owner's lawyer. It notified him that the property at his address had changed ownership effective May 15th, and his tenancy arrangement would need to be formalized with the new owner within 30 days, or the unit would be listed at market rent of $4,200 a month. He called me 11 minutes after he signed for it. Dad, what the hell is this? Good morning, Daniel. You sold the building? You sold it without telling me? I told him yes. I had sold it. I told him the new owner was a very reasonable person and that he should arrange to speak with them promptly. I told him I hoped his depositions had gone well in Ottawa. He was speechless for a moment. Then, where are you even living? Mount Pleasant, I said. Nice apartment. South-facing kitchen. Very quiet. He arrived at my door that evening without calling first. I let him in and made tea. He sat at my small kitchen table and looked around the apartment with an expression I had not seen on his face since he was a teenager, something between confusion and the early stages of grief. Dad, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Because it was my property, and I decided to sell it. But where am I supposed to live? Vanessa and I are planning our future here. We've been talking about... He stopped. He looked at his hands. We've been talking about buying the building from you. Someday. I know, I said. I heard that conversation once. Through the floor. He looked up. I heard you tell Vanessa that when I was gone, she'd probably get the building and you'd convert it to 2 large units. In February. The night her parents were visiting, after you told them I managed the building for you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in years. Daniel, I said, I want you to understand something. I am not angry with you. I have not been angry for a long time. I am disappointed in who you chose to become, and I decided that if you were going to treat me like hired help, I was going to stop providing the services. He tried to speak. I held up my hand. I have also done something else, I said. Something I want you to know about before you hear it from anyone else. I have sponsored 3 of your family from Poland to come to Canada, Alexander, Zofia, and Tomasz. They arrive in August. I have used a portion of the sale proceeds to cover their sponsorship obligations, settlement support, and first year of housing. He stared at me. The cousins you've mentioned? I've never even met them. I know, I said. That was my failure as much as yours. I should have insisted you know your family. I didn't. This is my correction. He left, without finishing his tea. I watched him walk down East 12th and turn the corner. And I sat back down at my kitchen table, both hands flat on the surface, the way my father used to sit, and I let myself breathe. The story might have ended there, a quiet transaction, a private lesson, a father and son with something broken between them that would take years to repair. But my son had chosen a very particular stage for his next move, and it turned out that stages work in both directions. 3 months later, on a Saturday evening in August, Daniel and Vanessa hosted an engagement party. By this time, Daniel had been renting his Kitsilano unit from the new owner at market rate, $4,200 a month. He had also discovered, in the course of that arrangement, that the 2 other tenants in the building had received their notices and that the incoming owner planned to eventually owner-occupy 2 of the 3 units. He had found this out from Mrs. Abramowitz, who mentioned it to him in the lobby and who, bless her, had not softened the details at all. The engagement party was at a venue in Yaletown, a converted warehouse space that rented for $6,000 for the evening, plus catering from a restaurant on Robson that charged $98 a head, plus florals from a shop in Gastown that I know charged Vanessa $4,000 for the arrangements because she posted the invoice on her Instagram stories and didn't realize it was visible to everyone for 24 hours. 62 guests, the firm's senior partners, Gordon and Patricia Hartley, Vanessa's friends from UBC, Daniel's articling cohort, a city councilor, someone new tangentially, 2 people from the tech industry, who I suspect were invited because they had verified Instagram accounts. I was not on the guest list. I found out about the party through Mrs. Abramowitz, who had seen the invitation in the lobby mail when Daniel left it sitting on the entry table. She described it to me during our Wednesday morning tea, which we had maintained as a ritual since her tenancy transition. She seemed to be watching my face very carefully when she mentioned it. I told her I had known Daniel was engaged and was glad he was happy. She patted my hand and said, "Victor, you are a very patient man, and I think the universe notices these things." I smiled. Then I made a phone call. Alexander had arrived in Vancouver 3 weeks earlier, ahead of Zofia and Tomasz, who were coming on a later connecting flight. He was staying in a furnished apartment I had rented in East Vancouver, learning the city, sleeping on a schedule that was still confused by the time change, and cooking elaborate Polish meals at 2 in the morning because he was jet-lagged and cooking was how he calmed his nerves. He answered my call on the first ring. "Uncle Victor," he said, "are you free Saturday evening? I want to take you to dinner." I told him there was somewhere I wanted us to go instead. I gave him the address and the time. I told him to bring Zofia and Tomasz, who were arriving Friday afternoon. I told him to dress nicely. He asked no questions. Saturday evening, I arrived at the Yaletown venue at 9:15 after the dinner service had finished, and the party was well into the social portion of the evening. I knew Daniel's schedule. The way you know any person you raised, the rhythms are in you, even after they've stopped being shared. The formal toasts would be done by 9. The senior partners would be loosened by good wine. Vanessa's parents would be holding court somewhere near the bar. I walked through the main door with Alexander, Zofia, and Tomasz. The room was beautiful. I will give Vanessa that. She has an eye for atmosphere, warm lighting, long tables with linen, the Vancouver skyline visible through the warehouse windows. 62 people in their best clothes, glasses of Okanagan wine, and BC sparkling. The steady hum of a celebration in full gear. I saw Daniel before he saw me. He was standing near the bar with 2 men I recognized as partners from his firm, laughing at something, entirely comfortable in his world. Then he turned and saw me, and the laugh died on his face. He crossed the room quickly, intercepting me near the entrance. "Dad." His voice was low and controlled. "This isn't a good time." "It seemed like a fine time to me," I said. "You're celebrating. I wanted to wish you well." His eyes moved to Alexander, Zofia, and Tomasz, standing behind me. He had never met any of them in person. He looked at them and then back at me, and I watched him processing. "Who are these people?" "Your family," I said, loud enough that the couple standing nearest to us turned to look. "Your cousins from Krakow, Alexander, Zofia, and Tomasz Romano. I would like to introduce them to you." Alexander stepped forward and extended his hand. The natural, easy confidence of a young man who knows exactly who he is. "You must be Daniel. Your uncle has told us a great deal about you. I'm your cousin. My grandmother and Victor's mother were sisters." Daniel shook the hand mechanically. the lawyer reflex taking over when the human responses failed. Gordon Hartley materialized at Daniel's shoulder, a glass of wine in hand, looking at our small cluster with polite inquiry. "Everything all right over here?" "Gordon," I said pleasantly. "Good to see you again. I wanted to introduce you to some people." I watched Daniel's expression. Gordon Hartley had been introduced to me, twice, as the building manager. This was the moment he understood what kind of evening this was going to be. "Gordon, these are the Romano cousins," I paused. "Kowalski." "Forgive me. The Kowalski cousins, from Krakow, Poland. My family. I sponsored them to come to Canada this summer. Daniel's family as well, though they've never had the opportunity to meet until this evening." Gordon looked between me and Daniel. He was a former partner at a major accounting firm. He had built a career on reading rooms. He read this one in about 4 seconds, and his expression became very carefully neutral. "How wonderful," he said, and the way he said it made very clear. He did not yet know what to make of any of this, but intended to maintain his composure until he did. Vanessa arrived then, carrying a glass of champagne, her engagement ring catching the light. She looked genuinely happy until she saw my face and then Daniel's face, and then the 3 young people standing behind me, and her happiness became something more complicated. "Viktor," she said carefully, "I didn't realize you were coming this evening. I should have been invited," I said, still pleasantly. "But I understood. I am, as Daniel may have mentioned to your parents on a couple of occasions, simply the building manager." The pause that followed spread outward through the nearby conversations the way a stone spreads rings across still water. Patricia Hartley had joined us now, drawn by some social antenna for atmospheres about to shift. She looked at Daniel with an expression that I think he will not forget for a long time. The kind of look a mother gives when she realizes the man her daughter is marrying may be a more complicated proposition than advertised. "Daniel, what is your father talking about?" Patricia asked. My son opened his mouth and nothing came out. Alexander spoke, and I was grateful for it, because he said it without cruelty. He simply stated the truth in the plain-spoken way of someone who has not yet learned to be indirect about things that matter. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, our Uncle Victor came to Canada in 1981 and spent 41 years building a business in this city. He raised Daniel alone after his wife passed. He paid for Daniel's university and his law school. He owned the building where Daniel lived for 4 years without paying rent. He sold that building this spring and used the money to bring us here, to give us the same chance he was given. He did not tell Daniel he was doing it. He simply did it. And now we are here." There was a considerable silence. Zofia added softly, "He is the most generous man we have ever met. And we wanted to meet his son." I looked at Daniel. My son was standing in the middle of his engagement party in his Holt Renfrew suit, surrounded by his senior partners and his future in-laws and 62 guests, and he was looking at me with an expression I had not seen since he was very young. Something raw, something that had been underneath the polish and the professional name and the curated apartment for a long time, waiting. "I have something to say," I said, and the room was quiet enough that I didn't need to raise my voice. "I have been coming to this neighborhood for 40 years. I know many of you have eaten at Kowalski's Deli on Commercial Drive, and I am glad for every one of you. My son has worked hard and built a serious career, and I am proud of that. I am proud of him." Daniel's jaw tightened. "But I want the people in this room to know one thing," I continued. "Daniel has introduced me to a number of people over the years as his building manager, or as Joe, who helps with the property, or as the person who handles maintenance. He has never, in 4 years, introduced me as his father to anyone in his professional world. And I want you to know that before you celebrate the man he's become, because the man you marry is not only the man he shows you at dinner parties, he is also the man he is when no one important is watching." Patricia Hartley set down her champagne glass. Gordon Hartley stepped away from the group without a word, and I watched him go. One of Daniel's senior partners, a silver-haired man named Douglas Pemberton, who I recognized from the firm's website, was already moving toward the exit, speaking quietly to his wife. Vanessa looked at Daniel for a long time. I will not describe that look in detail because it was private in a way the rest of the evening had not been. She looked at him the way people look at someone when they are rearranging their understanding of who that person is. Then she looked at me with something I can only describe as recognition, as if she had suspected something for a long time and had just been shown the evidence. She left the room with her parents. She didn't take off her ring that evening, but she left. Daniel and I stood in the slowly emptying room for a while without speaking. The catering staff moved around us politely. Alexander had gone to find water for Zofia, who had gone pale in the warmth of the room. Tomasz was standing quietly by the window looking at the Vancouver skyline, the way you look at something you have dreamed about and are not yet sure is real. Finally, Daniel said, "You didn't have to do it like this." "No," I said. "I didn't." "You're right about that." "Then why?" I thought about it genuinely before I answered. "Because private lessons weren't landing," I said. I tried. A quiet conversation in a kitchen doesn't compete with 4 years of reinforcement. Sometimes the only way a person learns is when the thing they've been protecting is gone. He didn't say anything. Alexander returned with water for Zofia. He looked between me and Daniel with the careful empathy of someone who had heard this story secondhand many times and was now standing in it. He said nothing, which was exactly right. I put my hand briefly on my son's arm. "Come to dinner Sunday if you want. East 12th. Alexander is cooking." Then I left with my family. The following Monday, Douglas Pemberton asked Daniel to come in for a conversation. The firm's position, as Pemberton communicated it, was that personal matters that became public in ways damaging to professional reputation required review. Daniel told me this himself. 2 weeks later, over a dinner in my Mount Pleasant apartment where he arrived unannounced and sat down and said, "I think I owe you more than an apology." And I said, "Let's start with the apology and work from there." He didn't lose his job. Pemberton is fair, and Daniel is a genuinely skilled lawyer, and the firm's partners are practical people who understand that a person can be flawed without being incompetent. He was moved to a different team, one with less client-facing work for the foreseeable future, and his path to partnership was recalibrated. He is working to rebuild. He knows this. Vanessa did not call off the engagement that evening. She and Daniel had several long conversations over the following weeks. She told him, from what he shared with me, that she had not known the full picture of their living arrangement or the building sale, and that she needed to understand who she was building a life with before she could answer the question of whether to continue. They are still together. The destination wedding in Italy has been postponed. They are seeing a couples therapist in Kitsilano, which I think is actually the most sensible thing either of them has done. It is November now. 5 months since the party. Alexander opened a small supper club in East Vancouver, not a full restaurant. 30 seats. Thursday to Sunday. Fixed menu. Modern Polish food with BC ingredients. Cedar smoked duck pierogi. Wild mushroom borscht with Okanagan sour cream. Saskatoon berry compote. He has a 4-week wait list. He called me on the evening of his first fully booked service and spoke in Polish for 20 minutes, and I sat in my kitchen chair and listened and felt something in my chest that I had not felt in years. Zofia is enrolled in the nursing program at BCIT. She works part-time at a care home in New Westminster, on the overnight shift. She sends me voice messages every few days, usually from the hospital parking lot while she waits for her bus, telling me about her patients. She has a gift for this work. She sees the whole person, not just the chart. Tomasz has 3 engineering clients in the Lower Mainland, all small to medium construction firms needing project management support. He works 12-hour days and sends me a detailed spending summary every month, itemizing every dollar I have given him that he plans to repay. I told him again that family doesn't keep accounts. He said he keeps accounts for himself, not for me. I told him that was a very Polish answer. He said he was a very Polish man. We laughed. They come to my apartment for dinner every Sunday. All 3 of them. Sometimes with friends they have made at work or school. The kitchen is too small for what we attempt in it. We push the table against the wall and stand around it eating. It is the best meal of my week. Every week, the way Sunday dinners used to be before they stopped. Daniel has come twice. The first time he sat quietly and watched his cousins the way you watch people who have something you once had and let go of. He didn't say much. Alexander told stories about Krakow. Zofia made him try her grandmother's apple cake. Tomasz showed him photos on his phone of the family house in Poland, of people Daniel barely remembered from childhood visits, of a country he had deliberately made small in his imagination, and was now seeing fully for the first time. The second time Daniel came, he stayed until midnight. He and Alexander talked about the restaurant business for 2 hours. He helped Zofia with the dishes. He asked Tomasz to explain the project management software he was using and listened carefully to the answer. When he was leaving, he stood in my doorway for a moment with his coat half on and said, "Dad, I'm sorry I introduced you as the building manager. I'm sorry for all of it." "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." "I know that too," I said. I watched him walk to his car, a different car now, a modest Honda sedan. The Audi lease returned in the spring. He looked younger somehow than he had a year ago. Humbler. Less finished. I closed the door and stood in my small kitchen with the good south-facing light and looked at the copper pot on the stove that my mother had given me when I left Krakow in 1981. A pot I had used in the deli for 4 decades, that I had carried in a cloth bag through 3 apartments and 1 house and a triplex, and now this apartment, the pot that still made better soup than anything I had ever tasted in a restaurant, and I thought about what it means to come from somewhere, to carry something forward, to hand a thing across an ocean and across generations and insist that it matters. I am 67 years old, and I have less than I had a year ago in the way that property records measure things. I have more in every way that I know how to count. My family is here. They remember where they come from. They are proud of it. That is the whole of the story.